I married Ethan believing I was stepping into a partnership built on trust and respect. I wasn't loud by nature, and I didn't feel the need to prove myself to anyone. From the outside, it probably looked like I was just a quiet woman who got lucky. Ethan was successful, confident, and well-known in his circle. People assumed that explained everything about me. From the very first family dinner, I felt it. The looks that lingered too long. The pauses when I spoke. Conversations that stopped the moment I entered the room. No one said anything directly at first, but I could feel the judgment sitting heavy in the air. It was clear they had already decided who I was without asking a single question. Lauren, Ethan's sister, made it obvious in small ways. She would ask where I grew up, then smile politely when I answered, like she was confirming something she already believed. She talked about money openly, casually reminding everyone how hard Ethan had worked for what he had. When she looked at me, there was always that same quiet message in her eyes: "You didn't earn this." I stayed calm. I stayed respectful. I told myself it would get better once they knew me. But they never tried to know me. To them, I was just the woman who married into their family, someone who should be grateful and careful not to overstep. Ethan noticed more than he admitted. Sometimes he would squeeze my hand under the table when his sister made a comment that went a little too far. Other times, he would change the subject when his mother asked uncomfortable questions about my past. But he never truly shut it down. He never corrected them. And slowly, that hurt more than their opinions ever could. I chose silence, not because I was weak, but because I didn't see the value in explaining myself to people who had already made up their minds. I knew who I was. I knew where I came from. I knew what I had built before Ethan ever entered my life. Those things were mine, and I didn't owe anyone an explanation. Still, there were moments when it stung. When laughter followed a joke I wasn't part of. When decisions were made without my input. When I was treated like a guest in my own marriage. I reminded myself to be patient, to stay grounded, to observe rather than react. What none of them realized was that my quiet nature wasn't ignorance. It was awareness. I listened. I noticed patterns. I remembered words people thought I wouldn't catch. And every time they underestimated me, they revealed more about themselves. So I smiled when expected. I stayed polite. I let them believe their version of me. Because sometimes, the strongest position you can hold is letting people think they're smarter than you. They thought they had me figured out. They were wrong. After the wedding, things changed in ways that were easy to miss at first. Nothing dramatic happened. There were no loud arguments or open insults. Instead, it was the small moments that slowly wore me down. The kind that make you question yourself before you question anyone else. Lauren began to take charge of everything related to the family. Holidays, gatherings, even simple dinners were planned by her. I would hear about decisions after they were already made. When I asked questions, she would smile and say it was easier this way. Her tone was polite, but the message was clear: I wasn't part of the inner circle. Diane, Ethan's mother, spoke in soft reminders. She liked to talk about appreciation and loyalty, often while looking directly at me. She would say things like how important it was to be thankful when you married into a good family. It wasn't said as advice. It felt more like a warning wrapped in kindness. Ethan told me not to take it personally. He said his family was just traditional and needed time to adjust. I wanted to believe him. I trusted him. So when papers were placed in front of me, I didn't hesitate. He explained they were routine documents, nothing unusual, just things that needed to be signed now that we were married. I didn't study every line. I didn't ask many questions. I signed because I trusted the man I married. Not long after that, I noticed another shift. Conversations would pause when I entered a room. Phones were put down. Voices lowered. At family gatherings, Ethan would sometimes step away with Lauren or his mother, leaving me sitting alone. When I asked later what they were talking about, he brushed it off and said it was work or family matters I didn't need to worry about. I started to feel like I was being managed instead of included. Decisions were made for me, not with me. My role felt smaller, quieter, like I was expected to follow rather than stand beside my husband. There were moments when I wanted to speak up, to ask why things felt so controlled, so carefully arranged. But every time I did, Ethan reassured me. He said I was overthinking. He said this was just how his family operated. He promised nothing was wrong. Still, something didn't sit right. Trust doesn't disappear all at once. It fades in pieces. A look avoided. A question unanswered. A signature given too easily. I began to realize that love, when mixed with conditions, stops feeling safe. I stayed calm on the surface. I kept playing my role. But inside, I started paying closer attention. Because when people begin deciding things for you without your voice, it's rarely accidental. And that was when I understood, this marriage wasn't just about love anymore. It came with rules. One evening, I came home earlier than expected. The house was quiet, but I could hear voices coming from the living room. I wasn't trying to listen. I was just walking past when I heard my name. That made me stop. Lauren was speaking first. Her voice was calm, almost casual. She was talking about how everything was secured now, how there was no risk anymore. Diane responded, sounding relieved. She mentioned that the paperwork was solid and that the family's assets were protected no matter what happened in the marriage. Then Lauren laughed and said that if things ever went wrong, I would leave with nothing. There was a pause after that. Not because anyone disagreed, but because they were waiting for Ethan to respond. I held my breath. He didn't say a word. No correction. No defense. No discomfort. His silence felt louder than anything they had said. They continued talking, discussing timelines and outcomes as if I were a problem already solved. They spoke about me like I wasn't a person, but a possibility they had successfully controlled. I stood there, unseen, listening to people I had tried to respect talk about my future as if it didn't belong to me. What hurt the most wasn't Lauren's confidence or Diane's approval. It was Ethan's silence. The man I trusted. The man who promised to protect me. He let them talk about me like that and chose comfort over honesty. In that moment, something inside me shifted. Not anger. Not panic. Clarity. I finally understood why the papers were rushed. Why questions were brushed aside. Why I was kept out of certain conversations. This wasn't caution. It was planning. I walked away before they could see me. I went to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing. My hands were steady, but my chest felt heavy. I replayed the conversation in my head, hoping I had misunderstood it. But the words were too clear. Later that night, Ethan came into the room like everything was normal. He asked how my day was. He smiled. I looked at him and realized how easy it was for someone to hide the truth when they believed you would never question it. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I needed time to think. To understand what this meant and what I had allowed by trusting too easily. That night, I learned something important. Betrayal doesn't always come with raised voices or dramatic scenes. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through a door you weren't meant to stand behind, carried by words meant for someone else. And once you hear it, you can never unhear it. After that, the distance became more obvious. I wasn't asked for opinions anymore. Plans were made without my knowledge, and I was informed only when it was convenient. Family events came and went with short notices, as if my presence was optional. Sometimes I found out about gatherings after they had already happened. Inside our home, things shifted too. Bills and finances were no longer discussed with me. Ethan handled everything and told me not to worry about it. At first, I tried to respect that boundary. But then he handed me a set amount of money each month and called it a household budget. It wasn't a discussion. It was a decision. The first time I questioned it, he looked offended. He asked why I needed to know more. He reminded me that he was taking care of everything and that I should trust him. When I pushed back, even gently, his tone changed. He accused me of becoming obsessed with money. He said I was starting to show my true colors. That sentence stayed with me. From that point on, the label was no longer whispered. Lauren said it openly, usually disguised as a joke. Diane nodded along in quiet agreement. Comments were made about being careful, about intentions, about how some people marry for comfort rather than commitment. No one looked at me directly when they said it, but I always knew who they were talking about. Ethan didn't stop them. Sometimes he even agreed. He reminded me of how much he provided and how little stress I should have. Any attempt to speak up was turned into proof against me. The more I defended myself, the guiltier I seemed in their eyes. I started to feel small in my own life. I measured my words. I avoided asking questions. I learned how to stay quiet in rooms where my presence was barely acknowledged. My dignity wasn't taken all at once. It was chipped away, piece by piece. What hurt the most was realizing how easy it was for them to believe the worst about me. No one asked what I wanted. No one cared how it felt to be treated like a liability instead of a wife. At night, I lay awake wondering how things had changed so much without me noticing when it happened. I questioned myself. I replayed conversations. I wondered if silence had made them comfortable enough to go this far. But deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't about money. It was about control. And once control is established, respect is usually the first thing to disappear. I was still there. Still married. Still breathing. But the woman they were turning me into was someone I didn't recognize. During that time, I started spending more moments alone with my thoughts. When everything around me felt controlled, my memories were the only place that still belonged to me. I thought about my life before Ethan, before his family, before the constant feeling of being judged. I wasn't always this quiet woman trying to keep the peace. I had built my life step by step, long before marriage was ever part of my plan. I learned discipline early. I learned how to live within my means, how to plan ahead, and how to make decisions without needing approval. Those habits didn't come from comfort. They came from responsibility. My father had taught me that. He believed in preparation, not appearances. He used to say that real security was something you built quietly, without announcing it to the world. After he passed, I carried his words with me, even when life pulled me in unexpected directions. There was an inheritance he left behind. It wasn't something I talked about. Not because I was ashamed, but because it never felt like anyone's business. I treated it as a foundation, not a shortcut. I made careful choices with it. I invested slowly and thoughtfully. I didn't rush. I didn't gamble. I let time do its work. Those investments grew over the years, quietly, steadily. No headlines. No attention. Just consistency. By the time I met Ethan, my life was already stable. I didn't need rescuing. I didn't need someone else's name or status. I chose love because I wanted it, not because I depended on it. As I thought about everything that had happened, my father's voice came back to me clearly. He always warned me about revealing too much to people who benefit from misunderstanding you. He said that once people see your strength, they either try to use it or compete with it. I finally understood why I had stayed silent for so long. Not out of fear, but out of instinct. Some part of me knew that being underestimated gave me space to observe, to protect what mattered, and to decide my next move without pressure. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm. Not hopeful. Not excited. Just steady. I stopped trying to defend myself in my own head. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone in that house. They believed a version of me that suited them. I knew the truth. And that truth didn't need their permission to exist. The gathering was meant to be casual. Just family, food, and conversation. I went in with low expectations and even lower hopes. I told myself to stay calm, to get through the evening without drawing attention. I didn't expect respect, but I also didn't expect what happened next. Everyone was seated when Lauren raised her glass. She smiled in a way that made the room feel smaller. She started talking about family, about success, about how important it was to know your place. Then she looked straight at me and laughed. She said some people were lucky enough to marry well and never have to worry about working again. She called it being taken care of. Being kept. A few people laughed. Others looked away. I sat there, still and quiet, feeling the heat rise in my face. Before I could even process it, Diane added her own comment. She said wearing the Brooks name was a privilege, something many people would do anything for. She said gratitude was important, especially for someone who gained so much through marriage. Then Ethan laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. But it was enough. That sound settled something inside me. I felt a shift, like a door closing gently but firmly. I realized I had been trying to earn a place at a table where I was never meant to sit as an equal. No one asked how I felt. No one noticed my silence. The conversation moved on, and my humiliation was treated like entertainment that had already served its purpose. I didn't argue. I didn't stand up or leave. I stayed where I was and listened. And in that quiet, something hardened. Not my heart, but my resolve. I stopped wanting their approval in that moment. I stopped hoping things would change if I tried harder or stayed quieter. I saw clearly that belonging was never an option they planned to give me. Ethan didn't look at me once after that. He acted as if nothing had happened. As if laughter could erase the weight of disrespect. I watched him carefully and understood that he wasn't confused. He had made his choice a long time ago. When the night ended, I thanked everyone politely. I smiled because it was expected. But inside, I was already stepping away. That was the moment I stopped trying to fit into their world. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. I didn't lose anything that night. I let go. After that night, I became very careful with my time and my words. I didn't change how I acted around them. I stayed polite. I stayed quiet. On the outside, nothing looked different. On the inside, I was moving with purpose. I started by reviewing everything I had signed. I didn't ask Ethan for copies. I found them myself. I read every line slowly, without emotion. For the first time, I wanted to understand the details, not the reassurance that had been given to me. Then I reached out to professionals. Not loudly. Not dramatically. I asked questions. I listened. I took notes. I learned what those documents actually meant and what they didn't. I learned where their power ended and where mine still existed. That was when I saw the truth clearly. The agreements only covered what came after the marriage. What I already owned was untouched. My past decisions, my long-term planning, my assets that existed before Ethan were still mine alone. There was no rush after that. I didn't feel panic or anger. I felt steady. Precision replaced emotion. Every step I took was intentional. At home, I continued playing my role. I didn't challenge comments. I didn't correct assumptions. When they talked about security and protection, I nodded. When they spoke as if everything was already decided, I stayed silent. They believed what they wanted to believe. That belief made them careless. I organized my personal records quietly. I documented everything that mattered. I prepared without announcing it. No confrontations. No warnings. Just clarity. Ethan noticed that I had become calmer. He mistook it for acceptance. Lauren took my silence as proof that she had been right all along. Diane seemed satisfied, as if the situation had settled into its proper place. That worked in my favor. I wasn't hiding. I was choosing when to be seen. Every day, I reminded myself not to rush. Power comes from timing, not noise. I didn't need to expose the truth yet. I needed to be ready. What they thought of me no longer mattered. Their confidence in their control made them predictable. And predictability makes preparation easier. I slept better during that time. For the first time in months, I felt aligned with myself. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was planning. And sometimes, the strongest move is letting people believe the story they created, until it's too late for them to change it. The meeting was scheduled like it was routine. I was told it was just a formality, a way to update documents and make sure everything was clear for the future. The tone was calm, confident. They believed this meeting would secure their position even more. We sat across a long table. Ethan was relaxed. Lauren looked satisfied, already acting bored. Diane watched closely, as if she were supervising the outcome. The professionals began speaking, explaining details in a neutral voice. Then the conversation shifted. Questions were asked about my financial history. Not assumptions, facts. Documents were placed on the table. Numbers were read out clearly and slowly. Accounts, holdings, companies, and inherited assets that existed long before my marriage were listed one by one. The room changed. Lauren stopped tapping her fingers. Diane leaned back, her expression tightening. Ethan's posture stiffened as he realized what was being said. No one interrupted. No one laughed. The information kept coming. What I owned. What I controlled. What was never part of their agreements. The silence grew heavy. The same people who once spoke so freely now avoided eye contact. I could see confusion, then discomfort, then something close to fear. Ethan finally looked at me. Not with anger. With shock. As if he were meeting someone he never expected to see. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. There was nothing he could say that would change what was already on record. Lauren didn't say a single word. The woman who always had something sharp to add sat completely still. For the first time, she had no comment, no joke, no label to throw at me. Diane asked a question, but her voice lacked confidence. The answer came quickly and clearly. There was no room left for doubt. I remained quiet throughout the meeting. I didn't explain myself. I didn't defend my past. I let the facts stand on their own. They were enough. What struck me most wasn't their reaction. It was the realization of how wrong they had been. Not just about money, but about who I was. They had mistaken silence for weakness and patience for dependence. When the meeting ended, no one rushed to speak. Chairs moved slowly. Papers were gathered without urgency. The control they thought they had no longer existed. As we stood to leave, Ethan tried to catch my eye again. I met his gaze briefly. There was no anger in me. Just distance. The truth had done what words never could. It had shifted everything. After the meeting, I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The facts had already done the work, and I knew the rest would follow naturally. I had all the control I needed, quietly, calmly, without showing off. I spoke to my lawyer the next day and began filing for separation. Not divorce in anger. Not divorce to hurt. I filed on my terms. Every step was measured. Every decision was clear. I made sure my assets, my investments, and everything I had built remained protected. There was no rush. There was no emotion guiding the process, only precision and clarity. Ethan realized, slowly and painfully, that he had married someone far stronger than he had imagined. Strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it is quiet, steady, and impossible to argue against. By the time he tried to confront me, the truth had already settled. His attempts to control me or the situation had no effect. Lauren and Diane had assumed they could manage me, shape the narrative, and dictate how I would act. That control evaporated. They watched as I stepped out of their story entirely, refusing to play the part they had written for me. Every whisper, every comment, every assumption they had made about me was proven false, without a single raised voice from me. I didn't seek revenge, and I didn't announce my victory. I didn't need to. Walking away on my terms, with dignity and independence intact, was stronger than any insult or humiliation they could have thrown at me. As I left the house, I felt a strange calmness. There was no bitterness, only clarity. I wasn't angry. I wasn't desperate for approval. I was free. For the first time in years, I was in charge of my life entirely. Ethan watched me go, realizing too late that the person he had underestimated had been planning, observing, and preparing all along. The Brooks family lost more than just me. They lost the story they thought they controlled, the image of me they wanted to believe. And I walked away, not needing anyone's validation, not needing anyone's apology. I simply reclaimed what was always mine and stepped into the life I had quietly prepared for. Sometimes, power isn't about fighting, it's about leaving, about letting others realize the cost of underestimating you while you quietly hold your ground. After leaving, my life felt lighter than I expected. The constant pressure, the whispers, the judgment, it was gone. For the first time in years, I could breathe without thinking about who approved of me or who had the power to belittle me. I wasn't running from anyone. I was simply reclaiming my space, my choices, and my peace. I moved into a smaller place at first. Nothing flashy, nothing meant to impress. Just a home where I could think, plan, and live on my own terms. I didn't need validation from anyone, not Ethan, not his family, not the world. The label they had pinned on me, gold digger, lost its meaning the moment I stopped caring what they thought. It followed me no more, and I didn't need to argue against it. I focused on my work, my investments, and the projects I had put on hold. Every decision I made was mine alone. The freedom to control my own life, to set my own rules, and to act without hesitation felt better than any recognition I had ever sought from others. I realized that the life I wanted wasn't defined by approval or wealth from someone else, it was defined by my independence and my choices. Sometimes, I thought about Ethan. Not with anger, but with understanding. He had never seen me clearly. He had underestimated me. And now, the very things he had mocked or ignored were what I carried forward with confidence. His surprise, the Brooks family's discomfort, all of it was behind me. Their narrative had crumbled, and I didn't have to fight to prove anything. The gold, the stability, the inheritance, the assets, the life I had built, had never belonged to them. It had always been mine. Revenge, I realized, doesn't always look dramatic. It doesn't need shouting or exposure. Sometimes it looks like patience. Sometimes it looks like dignity. Sometimes it looks like quietly walking away while others are left to face the consequences of their assumptions. That kind of strength is lasting, and it cannot be taken away. I started new routines, new friendships, and new opportunities. I traveled, I learned, I grew. Each day reminded me that the past didn't define me, and the labels people placed on me never did either. I was building a life defined by my choices, my effort, and my integrity. The gold they thought they controlled never left me. It wasn't a prize to take, it was mine by right, carefully preserved and quietly owned. And for the first time in my life, I felt complete, free, and entirely myself.